All right, everybody. Well, let's get started here. I'm really excited. So welcome, everybody. I'm Jack Leeser. I'm here with my wife, Sarah. She's going to be my sidekick and kind of my moderator and question answer and all that good stuff. So we thank you all for joining us for another Jack's Learning Circle interview. Every month I interview different experts in the horse world, and this month we have Kellie Stewart, an equine and human behavioralist. I've been looking forward to this ever since I first talked with Kellie a couple months ago. Before we get started, I want to let you know how this is going to work. I'm going to start off with some questions for Kellie, and then we're going to go into your questions. So if you have any questions, leave those in the question area on the comment section on the side of your screen, and let's get started. Let's bring Kellie on board here, and Kellie is coming from Australia, so I want everybody, there's a bit of a lag time here, so just bear with us as we go through this, and just punch in, make sure, can you all see us and can you hear us well? Just type in
Hi,
yes.
Jack. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Awesome. People are saying yes. 10-4.
Cool.
So if we can keep Kellie from
Excellent.
moving too much and getting too animated, we may be able to also steer. But I think we can hear her well.
That
So
might,
Kellie, so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, and I'll do my best to stay still. As you know, I like to talk with my hands, but I'll see if I can keep them under control for you.
Yes. Well, I first wanted to just kind of let people know how I got to know you. And a few months ago, I got to the privilege of doing a class with Dr. John DeMartini, and I guess he's probably one of the best human behavioralists in the world. And I got to talking with him, and he's like, "Hey, you need to get a hold of Kellie down in Australia. She not only knows human behavior, but she also knows horse behavior." So we connected up, and we're like, we've got to sit down and do this. So I'm just really fortunate to be able to do this. So just give us a little background on, how did you get into horses, and what's your story?
Thanks, Jack. So I got into horses at a very young age. I didn't actually grow up with a family with horses. I was one of those little girls that was in the suburbs that really just humbugged their parents for a pony. And from the age of, I can remember roughly around 5 or 6, I always had this dream to have a horse. And my parents would constantly say if I wasn't to be found where I should be, I would be in my bedroom drawing horses or reading horse books or looking at horse pictures. No matter what I would do, it was consistently around horses. So from the age of 6 going forward, that's all I can remember is like, Mom, Dad, I want a pony, I want a pony. But they actually wouldn't buy me a pony. I had to actually go to work from the age of 12 to be able to afford to buy my own horse. So that's really how I started out in the horse world. Nobody in my family actually still doesn't own any other horses except for myself. I'm the one that has the whole horse deal here in Australia. So that's how it started, and ever since then, now I work full time in the horse industry and also in the human behavioural industry as well. I have a ranch in Australia. We have 160 acres and approximately 60 horses that are actually on our ranch at the moment. Not all of them are mine. They are client horses. I and with my husband, actually, we probably own about 30 of those 60, so 50% are ours, and the rest are client horses. So every day, my life or my world is actually surrounded with horses and people.
Well, Australia to me is always kind of been fascinating, and I think it's such a huge place. Just tell us a little bit about, what part of Australia are you in? Are you actually in the outback area, and a little bit about Australia?
Some people would call Perth the outback because it's so far removed from the rest of the Australian states. So I'm in Western Australia and about an hour and a half east of Perth, which is the capital city here. West Australia has a population of 3.5 million people, and predominantly it's a dry, arid temperature. And at the moment we're in the winter months, so we actually do have green pasture at the moment. But coming into summer, we end up having no pasture at all, and we have to feed our horses probably from November all the way through until June each year. So 6 to 7 months of the year is feeding up for us with the horses. Western Australia is approximately 5,000, or Perth is approximately 5,000 kilometres from Sydney. So we do travel to the East Coast to conduct horsemanship clinics, and my husband Heath will actually travel with the horses 5,000 kilometres to actually do competition.
Wow.
So we're used to actually travelling long distances and being able to take our horses those long distances as well. Another part of Western Australia is, here I go with my hands, I've got them under control, is the top end of Western Australia, which is the Kimberley region and the Northern Territory region, which is what we call station country, and Americans would term that ranch country. I think the biggest ranch that you guys have in Texas is either the Four Sixes, which is North Texas, or the King Ranch, which is South Texas. So to equate that, one of our biggest ranches, or our ranch clients, has over 1 million acres. So we also travel north to actually conduct horsemanship and we call them station horsemanship working clinics, where we teach the people that actually still use horses to go to work with. You guys call them buckaroos, we call them jackaroos. So there's some commonalities, but there's some differences as well too.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like, we always kind of complain in Texas. We always have a long ways to go to get anywhere because Texas is so big. But I guess you guys have us beat hands down. So great. So let's jump in.
Yeah. Thank you.
What are some of the basic needs of a horse, and how the needs of a horse and the needs of a human? What can you kind of give us a basic idea of that from your perspective?
Okay, so the first thing that I'd love to be able to go into is why I sort of have stemmed over into the human behaviour component of actually teaching horsemanship, is that I started to notice back in 2007 when I was training horses for the public that I and my husband were able to actually sort of get some changes in the horses, and then the horses would go home and then all of a sudden they would revert back to what they had become. And we were getting this feedback that, you hadn't actually worked our horse or trained our horse, and, the horse would come back, we'd say, bring it back and we'll have a look. And the horse would come back and then, within 5 minutes it would actually be okay with us. But what I started to notice was that the humans were not able to actually communicate to the horses, or not understanding how to communicate to the horses in terms of what a horse really wants and needs. And I call it the horse's value system. So that point forward, I really started to look at what can I do to be able to teach people to understand how to communicate more effectively to their horses, to be able to get what they really want and need themselves too. So it becomes a reflective, mutually exclusive kind of deal where you then form a symbiotic relationship between each other. Once you understand what does a horse really want and need. So in that, you look at the horse in its basic form, and you want to ask the questions, what does a horse value the most? And that can become dependent on where it is and what it's actually sharing its life with at any given time or moment. Now, I've also noticed when I travel the world and get the opportunity to work with many different horses in different cultures, that these specific wants and needs from the horse don't really change too much. It's only they will actually change as they become a void to the horse. So if the horse perceives that it's actually missing, then it's going to actually search for what it's actually wanting or needing. And that can come in the form of comfort, food, and basically, its need for self-protection or self-preservation in the herd environment. So really those are the three basic needs and wants of a horse. And if you want to actually, you can equate that back to the basic human needs of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But that can change dependent on the environment, like I just mentioned. So what I started to notice is that the human was projecting their value system and what they want and need onto the horse. But the horse really can't come from a human perspective back to the human. It can only actually work from the level of the horse and the level of its basic wants and needs. Does that make sense?
Yeah, a while ago I saw this program about elephants, and they were talking about elephants that lived in the jungle when they had plenty of food were very playful, and they just were alive. And then they were showing these elephants in Africa that their whole life was going from one water hole to the next water hole. And it was almost like they were just kind of depressed, and it was a struggle. Everything was a struggle the whole time. So that's what just kind of reminded me as you're talking. Different locations, different settings for the horse. You're going to have different things show up in the horse. Am I reading that right?
Absolutely. So it is being aware of those particular things that, if it's a void, then the horse is going to act or respond in terms of that void, like you say with the elephants that are walking from waterhole to waterhole. Now, in today's domesticated horse world, the majority of horses don't really have that issue. Their issue is more about too much feed and too much water and, not having to actually seek those things out. So they become fat and lazy. And then they're protected or wrapped up in cotton wool. So they're actually polarized to that and degree of too much comfort as such. And then they're not really experiencing, if we were to take them back to, say, like you were talking about the elephants, to take them back to if they had to walk for water daily and to search for food daily, when there was actually times in the environment when there was lack of food or water, then you would still see that. Now, because I get the opportunity to be able to go to the northwest of Western Australia where there is millions of acres, we do get to see that in the horses, that they have to walk maybe 20 kilometres each day to actually get their water. So then they go and graze out, and so they drink only twice a day, maybe at lunchtime and maybe in the evening. But in today's domesticated world, where our horses are put in stables and maybe in yard situations where they don't actually get that opportunity, they are becoming fat and lazy. And so for me, this is where a lot of the problems actually stem from. I'm not saying by any means to actually like take your horse's water away or to, stop feeding your horse. It's
Yeah.
just to know that you're contributing to the other side of, actually actually not allowing your horse to actually live as he would if he was in his own environment in terms of his value system. So that is a human projection that is actually coming onto the horse as we want them to be, because it's more comfortable to us as a human being to have a horse in a stable or to have a horse in a yard where we can easily go and get it and we can easily feed it. But ultimately just know that you're not contributing to its value system, you're actually projecting a human value system upon that horse and creating the so-called effects that actually go with that.
Well, so what are
So
some
when
cons that you're seeing from the horse that has to walk 20 kilometers to the horse that's in the stable? There's got to be pros and cons on both of those. What would you say are some of those?
Definitely. So if we take the horse that has to walk to water, basically like a pro for that is that it's going to maintain a sense of fitness and a sense of strength within itself, because it's like, if you think, if you were to sit and watch TV every single day, that you would actually not have a sense of stamina or a sense of fitness, you would become fat and lazy. And though the horses that have to walk, and actually they are able to engage in self-preservation, so therefore their alertness and their awareness levels are much higher. And for me, seeing them as well, they are probably the most balanced-minded horses that I've had the opportunity to actually work with. Now, the drawbacks to them of having to walk to water is also, like to walk 20 Ks, is that, there are some extra stresses that actually go on within their own ecosystem, within their own self. And, that can play some wellness issues too with the horse, say like with feet and, leg injuries and whatnot, having to walk that extra distance as well. Now, the pros for the horse that lives in a yard or a stable situation is, to me, it comes back to the human. It's a pro for the human, and it's so that we can check on them and make sure that they're not injured, or that they're drinking a certain amount, because of our value that we actually have on the expense of actually spending money on the horse. Now, the cons of a horse actually being in a stable situation and also in a yard situation where he's not having to actually be in a herd or walk or spend that time where he can graze freely is, well, we all know about wellness issues or stable vices that actually do show up with horses. And then we also have the component of the conservation of energy. If the horse is and he hasn't moved, then he's going to have, and he's fed a lot, then he's going to have the need to actually, and he can't play because he's isolated and he's in a box or he's in a stall or a yard, then we're going to have to deal with those as a drawback to the human.
Cool.
Hope that made sense.
Yeah, no, it did. So talk a little bit about the values, and I know, John DeMartini talks a lot about this, so just go a little bit deeper into the values, how, you talked a little bit about that for the horses, and then bring in our own values here, and it's kind of, is there a way we can meld these together?
Definitely. So as a human being, our highest values are who we are as individuals. So each person, like yourself or myself, will have a unique set of value systems. Each of us as individuals will not have the exact same set of values. So you and myself have a set of values that are fingerprint specific to me and you, and They are unique to you and me. So no people on this planet have the same set of values. So what we tend to do is we tend to actually want to project our value system onto others and expect them to actually live like us. So this is where I see what happens with the horses as well. But if you are honest and you look at the relationship that you actually do share with other people, you'll see that you would expect perhaps your wife to be more like you, or if you have kids, them to be more like you. And what we are doing is trying to get others to live inside our value system, which is actually futile. It doesn't actually work that way. It's wiser to allow people to live inside their value system, which is the same for the horse, and honour them for their value system. And the way that we can actually do this is that we actually look at, say, how your unique set of values is actually a benefit to me in terms of my unique set of values. So if we're working with a horse, we want to look at the same. So, for example, I have a horse, his name is Jericho, and he's a stallion. And so he has a unique set of values that is reproduction, is highest on his values at the moment down here in Australia because we've just come into spring. So it's wise for me to understand that that is what is highest on his values at the moment, is to reproduce. And so what I'm going to receive in terms of that is reproduction behaviour. And so when I'm working with him and riding with him, it's then wise for me to look at how is this a benefit to me in terms of my highest values of actually teaching and research. So any opportunity that I get with behaviour that he is exhibiting, then I'm linking it back to my highest values of research and teaching. So did that make sense?
You're taking that stallion behavior and then going, how can I teach somebody or teach him with that, or use it as research?
Yes, definitely. I'm asking, how does his behaviour as a stallion at this time, which some people would label as not good, you know, because stallions will make noises, they'll honk and they might squeal a bit, and then he might get up when I'm riding him, and they may label him as being, he shouldn't do that, he should be calm, collected, and, you know, be a horse in another form. But in all honesty, he's a stallion that at this time of the year, he gets amorous and he will be vocal and he will use his front legs in terms of communication with other horses. And so I'm asking myself, how is this behaviour serving me? How is it a benefit to me in terms of my highest values of teaching and research? Now, if you had a horse that was exhibiting this kind of behaviour and teaching and research was not high on your values, but perhaps you had cooking or reading was high on your values, then it'd be wise to ask, how is my stallion or my horse behaving in this fashion a benefit to me in terms of my values of cooking? And then I would actually link that, and until you can actually see that there's just as many benefits to that kind of behaviour and linking it to your highest values, then what happens is our need and our tend to actually judge something as being good or bad actually calms down, and it becomes just an action that maybe a horse is exhibiting.
So how do you take that then, and let's say a horse is exhibiting something that is unruly or is out of character beyond what you can handle, how do you balance that?
Okay, I'm going to give you an example again. A couple of, maybe a year ago, I was presented with a horse that would have been labelled as dangerous and outside anybody's realm of safety in terms of what we label as human beings, of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. It was a horse that he was acting in self-preservation and he was engaging in the fight mode. And so he actually was attacking with teeth bared, ears back, and then turn around and double barrel at you while you're in a round pen situation with him. So instead of looking at what is actually the cause. I mean, instead of looking at what this is being wrong, I looked at, so what perhaps is the cause of this effect that is actually taking place? And looking at it from the horse's perspective and how he was actually exhibiting those expressions at that time. Now, this was really interesting to me because he was in a round pen situation with myself and I was riding another horse, a lead horse, and we had 4 to 5 other mares and a few other geldings that were behind a yard in the back of the round corral. And he himself was actually a gelding, but he was actually protecting the herd. And so I looked at it from his perspective in terms of what was most important to him as the herd protector in his mind, and then went about a way that we could actually communicate to him in his value system and understanding the innate nature of the horse, and allowed him to find the way back to a sense of balance, and allowed him, so in effect we set it up to communicate to the horse in terms of what's most valuable, important to him in that moment, but yet linking it to perhaps what us as human beings are wanting and needing as for the horse to share its life with us. And yes, in today's world that was unacceptable, and most people wouldn't put up with that kind of behavior and wouldn't take the time to understand and probably send him off to get his head cut off. But by looking at it from what he was actually valuing and communicating to him in terms of what was most important to him in that moment and over the next 3 days, and allowing him to find that he could actually live in terms of more of a balanced orientation where he could trust us, then he would turn loose to that. So to answer your question, it is about communicating to the horse in terms of his values.
So it sounds like you're giving him more of what he needs, so he gives you what you want.
Absolutely, yes. Yes.
Yeah. So you're using his wants instead of just going in and saying, no, you are not going to do that, and really you take, when you can force it out of him, but in a way you take something away from him if you do that, but instead you're giving him what he needs, so he goes, oh, I can be civil, I can come into the human world when I have what I need.
Exactly, yes. So what I've learned is I used to do the other way, where you would make a horse do something in terms of the old training paradigm or the old training regime, where it's compliancy and make that actually gets a horse to do something. But ultimately, what I started to notice and observe is that the horses were actually becoming enslaved in some form, and like you said, you're actually taking away a part of that horse that you're not ever going to actually get back again. Now, I spent a lot of time with Ray Hunt, and he was one that really opened my eyes to that form of thinking, is if you set it up for the horse to find it and allow him to, in terms of what he needs and his value system, then he'll actually trust you, he'll actually want to go to work for you, and you'll have a relationship that is symbiotic, that you can both go together. And it's almost like a dance. It's almost like when you see somebody doing the perfect waltz, that it just flows. And there's no sharp edges to it. It's just a sense of grace. Now, ultimately, that is the end result in terms of perfection of being able to get there. And believe me, I've tried both ways of making a horse do something and then setting it up and communicating to the horse in terms of his values. And I know the latter part is actually where the human will get the most fulfillment, and so does the horse get the most fulfillment. So that's what I opt for these days, and that's ultimately what I want to be able to teach and share with the horse community all over the world. If you communicate to your horse in terms of its values and its needs, then you get your values and your needs met too as a horse rider and a horse person.
Yeah, that's really cool. Do you find that we humans today have really kind of lost that sense of what the horse really needs because we're in such a domestic environment with them all the time that we really lose the true, this is what the horse needs, this is what the horse values?
Yes, yes, definitely. I think with today's world, in terms of everything is getting faster, everything is getting where the human is looking for instant gratification and it has to be done now. Unfortunately, like the horse can't fit into that world. Like he lives the life he lives of, it is a pretty simple life. But yet, if we can understand that, and if us as human beings that share our lives with horses can learn to communicate back down to that level and just allow them to be there, then truly that's when it does become instant gratification. The more we project and want something now, then, the longer it's going to take, and the more challenges that we're going to receive actually during that time, and the more we're actually causing our own effect of not getting what we want or need.
Yeah, so it really sounds like we have to become more. We have to be able to recognize and see what does the horse really need. We can go in there and we can just train it or force it, if you will, but like you were saying, they kind of lose something. But if we really just go in there and, okay, this is what you need, how can we use that to help us get what we want out of that? So that's awesome. So you all listening, go ahead. If you've got any questions,
Excellent.
leave them in the question area there. And Kellie, we want to hear about Africa. You just got back from Africa and spent some time with the prey animals there. Tell us about that.
Yes, I did actually. I was in Kenya for 10 days out on the Mara, sort of that's west in southeast of Africa, southwest, and I was fascinated. There was a part of me that wanted to go and study predator behavior in its truest form. So where do you go to do that? You go to Africa and you go to the lions. So while I was out there, and also linking it back to my highest values of horses and human behavior, what I really noticed is I studied the zebra, and zebra in a herd situation, in big herd situations, and I studied them, watching them and how they actually form these symbiotic relationships with other prey animals like the wildebeest or the giraffe or the kudu or the antelope that actually roam the plains of Africa, and how that they would actually come together as a group to be able to have so many eyes on the ground, to be able to look out for the predators in terms of the lions or the cheetahs or the leopards or the hyenas and the jackal, and how they all work together as a team when there was a sense of danger, when there was a predator that was actually in the area, that so many eyes on the ground would actually alert absolutely, there was thousands of these prey animals that would share their space together, but yet they were working as a team to keep each other safe in some form. And to watch how then the lions would actually work together as a team to be able to infiltrate that and to be able to become the apex predator and actually pick off something that was not able to defend or look after itself. So to me that was fascinating to watch that. Now, I got the opportunity to actually see in Kenya that they allow horse riding actually come into the Mara, and I got the opportunity to actually see some horse riders being surrounded by 12 lions, and they were unaware of these 12 lions that were actually surrounding them. And it was fascinating to watch the human behavior and the horse behavior that actually took place. Now, these lions, they had just made 2 kills, so they were not hungry in any way, shape, or form. But yet, as they were actually in a playful mode, as you said earlier on with the elephants that were in abundant with feed, they began to play. So these guys were abundant in feed at this time in Kenya, so they began to play, and the horses and the riders were the things that they were going to look to play with. So the riders were unaware of these lions that had positioned themselves around the actual horses. And what I noticed was that the horses actually saw the lions first, and then they became together as a herd. There was about 12 riders and horses. And so innately, the horses went back to what I was saying before, that the prey animals in their large group would naturally do. They went straight to a group and they bunched and they stopped. And they observed what was actually taking place. Because this is the thing that I really did see, is that if they were to run in that moment, they become prey. And so they all just stopped innately, and then the riders actually sort of noticed what the lions were doing. And then the head lead or the guide actually then took over in knowing what to do to confront the lions to actually get them to move on. And
well, that's really interesting, as we hear so often that the first instinct is to fight or flight, but what you're saying is the horses froze. Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes. So if you watch that, and if you think back to when you're actually riding your horse, there is a moment before the horse will actually act in flight, and that would be to freeze and to assess. So the horses actually were assessing what was taking place. They were actually bunching together as a group to form many, to be able to move as many as a bigger group if there was to actually have an attack or a predatory moment take place, so that they know that to be in numbers is the safest thing to actually happen. But I then also look at us as human beings. We separate our horses and we put them into stables or yards and take them away from that herd environment, which is so important to them, for them to have a sense of safety and a sense of self-preservation. But to watch them in that moment all bunched together and to be able to operate as a team, and they did. And they outnumbered the lions, and the lions just left. So another thing that I really did notice as well is, specifically with the giraffe as a prey animal too, their sense of self-preservation of what is actually taking place is so similar to the horse. Is they were walking through the long grass and some butterflies just came out and they actually froze and then moved. So even butterflies can affect a giraffe, and they're going to act in this self-preservation too. So when a butterfly jumps out at your horse, it's natural for him to actually react or respond to that. And what we tend to do is say, well, we can't do that. So we rub that out of them through, what do we call it, desensitization, and take that away from the horse. But if we just knew that that is absolutely necessary for a horse to feel comfortable within himself to be able to still activate that.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So tell us a little bit about, I guess you went to a lion sanctuary, and I just posted here today that video you took of, the guy walking with the lion. And talk about that and a little bit about that relationship. I guess to me that's really fascinating that somebody's willing to be out there with the lions, and they seem so casual about it.
Yeah, so I guess everybody's heard of Kevin Richardson, the Lion Whisperer. Myself and a group of other ladies, we spent a week out there at his lion sanctuary in the Dinakeng area, just north of Johannesburg in South Africa. in a voluntary situation. And again, I went there to experience the predator in his fullest form, which is the lions. Also, Kevin has their lions and some leopards and some hyena, the predators in terms of African predators. Now, what he has actually set up there is a sanctuary for the lions that he had worked with in another lion park in South Africa, and they were basically there as cub petting, and where tourists can actually go in and pat the cubs, etc., etc. And those lions then had grown up and were no longer sort of fashionable as such. You know, human beings want to pet or pat cubs, so basically once they turned like a year old, they weren't cute anymore. So then they didn't really have a need, did they? So like Kevin has taken them on from that point to be able to work with them. He's ultimately bringing education to the world about the can hunting. And what happens in Africa is that these cub petting farms are set up for people to go and pet, and then they're actually being desensitized to humans, and being desensitized to the point that they are like a dog or a cat. They're just like a pet, but yet then they're actually sold to international hunters to be able to hunt, so that they're an easy kill. So basically, his message is to actually sort of bring that awareness to the world. But these particular lions that he has out there are a byproduct of that, as such. That so they are quite desensitized to humans, but yet it's like if you were to walk into my place and my 4 dogs, they would bark and they would growl at you because they don't know you until they got to understand who you were and trust you. Then you could become mates with them. These lions that Kevin has there are very similar to that. He has a relationship with them, that he can take them for walks and he can spend time with them, and they trust and respect him for that. But I did notice there was 2 particular lions that I were sharing space with, and they just did not like me at all. They took more time to be able to settle in, to trust people, etc. And then looking at their background and understanding that they were semi-wild lions. They hadn't been through the cub petting kind of deal, so they weren't desensitized to humans as much. They still had that natural element of fear and protection to humans. So they would exhibit the expressions. And I don't know whether you saw, but on my Facebook page, I put a picture of me watching my autonomic nervous system when one of them actually particularly took a swipe at me. And I was looking at my behaviour in terms of fear to the lions. So part of my studies there was watching how humans actually react and respond to fear when it's actually put in front of you, like a lion, for example.
Well, that's really fascinating. So how, it really sounded like what's happening is the lions are getting desensitized like we really are doing to the horses. And so can Kevin get to the point where he truly can trust them, or do you always have to have an element of being on guard?
I think in watching and listening to him that he's reading their behaviour consistently and continually. And so, yes, in knowing that he is fully aware and present in any moment that he is actually with them. So to answer your question, he's continually on guard. He's continually aware. He's continually present. And linking that back to horses, it's wise for a horse rider and a human to actually embody those traits as well when you're actually working with them. Because a horse knows when you are not present, just as the lion knows when you are not present as well. So there was a particular moment watching Kevin, there was a part of him that he was talking to us, the students, and then one of the lions just jumped on him and jumped on his head and took advantage of that situation. while he was focusing on us, they were like, hey, get your attention back to me. So he got the feedback, which was, like a jump, but it was just a play jump for him to wake him up. So I see that similar kind of form taking place with horse riders and their horses. If you're not present in the moment and not connected with that horse, then the horse is going to give you a similar kind of feedback, where he might jump or he might sort of create some kind of situation to get you back to being aware with him. So being with the lions, I saw lots of fight or flight and freeze behaviour from them, as what I was linking back to the horses as well. But also within myself, I saw how I was actually emulating the similar behaviours to any one of these animals, the horses or the lions. So similarly, we are not that much different in terms of our base needs and wants, in terms of security and survival. But yet, us as human beings have the ability to actually override that in some form and take it to a next level of understanding, where we have foresight so that we can actually plan on how we're actually going to either work in these situations or respond in these situations without reacting so much. In the animal, like the predator or the prey, they can only work from a base level of the animal mind, where they really are in reactionary mode and they work from trial and error. And so they live in the moment and they really can't process what can actually happen in the future, unlike us human beings. So that is the difference between the horses and the lions compared to us as human beings. And ultimately, to break it down scientifically, we have a different level of the brain that we operate from. Humans have a higher level of the cortex system than mostly the horses or the lions do.
Fascinating. So what would you say from all, taking the lion behavior, the horse behavior, the human behavior, what are some things that interlink that has helped you just learning that recently? What are some things that have just come together knowing those three things?
So what really stands out most for me is it comes back to the value system and understanding the species as an individual and their unique set of values or needs that they actually live by. And knowing and honouring the fact that a lion has a set of values, a horse has a set of values, and a human has a set of values. And within those, we all have a basic set of needs. And to be able to operate within those value systems and to be able to allow each animal as an individual to experience that, and then ultimately us as human beings will really get what we want and we need as well too.
Wow, so you're really saying, because we as humans, we tend to want to dominate and take over, but if you give them what they need and they'll give us what we need. So, and it sounds like if we do that with each other, we'll have better relationships there too. So Sarah's going to start asking some questions.
Yes.
Here we've got a few questions that people are asking, so she'll read those to you.
Cool.
This question's from Gary. If horse wants to be with the herd, but you want a riding lesson, do you bring the herd with you to your lesson?
Okay. No. You become the herd. So ultimately, you become the herd to the horse. It is about looking at what herd or leadership qualities can you embody as a human being to become the leader to that horse. Now, ultimately, if the horse is still seeking the herd, he's giving you feedback to let you know that you're not the leader that he wants to be with. And I know that that may be a little hard to hear, but if you can truly use that feedback as constructive, then it just gives you feedback to let you know a little more on perhaps how you can actually work towards being more of a leader to your horse. Innately, horses will follow a leader. If you study herd behavior, you will actually see that within the herd there will always be a leader. And as a human being, again, if you embody those value systems that the leader exhibits within the herd and emulate those when you're actually riding or around your horse, then your horse will want to be with you.
Well, it's fascinating because I don't know if you've seen this, but I've seen it over the years. When you have somebody who's truly a leader in the herd, they can walk out in the herd and the herd just kind of minds them. Somebody else goes and walks into it and the horses just do whatever they want to. So that sounds a lot like what you're talking about. So cool. Here's the next question.
What did the gelding that was acting aggressively need that he wasn't getting? Sorry if you answered that earlier, I missed it.
Okay, so the gelding, he actually required space. So in terms of the actual round pen that he was in, he felt too confined, and he was also protecting his herd. So what he was actually looking for was actually space. And he also was looking for leadership from myself and the horse that I was actually with. So in terms of what we did give him was that we actually opened up the space and went out of the round pen, and we went into our arena that we have, which is 100 meters by 80 meters. So we gave him more space to be able to move and to be able to feel like he could actually engage in the flight zones and in the flight mechanisms instead of the fight mechanisms. So we didn't take away his ability to act in self-preservation, we gave him another option of self-preservation. And then gradually over time, we built the trust factor that he learned to actually close the distance of the space between us and him. And then we also got him to trust that he could leave his herd situation. So effectively, we were giving him the leadership qualities that he was actually seeking out to feel safe within himself when he was outside the herd.
So it slowly transitioned from the herd back to you because you gave him that space to be able to move that time to transition that trust.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, the next question is from Mary Hitchcock. If whilst working with horses, a person has a fear of a perceived thing, like scared of putting a horse on a float or cantering for the first time, how is the human fear reflected back into the horse, and what are some of the behaviors a horse could reflect back to the human, which could be considered bad behavior?
Hi, Mary. So in terms of if a horse is not going, the first part of the horse is not going onto the float because the human has a fear of putting it on there, then the horse is actually reflecting the fear within the human. If you're already thinking, I'm not sure if I can get this done, then the horse is actually thinking that too. It's actually reflecting that within your thought system. So it's wise for you as a human to actually look at what specifically are you thinking or fearing that you can't actually get this done, or what specifically are you fearing or thinking is going to happen, and then defining or deriving the answer from that, and then looking at the benefits perhaps if that was to happen. And also knowing that fear is a future imagined response, and it's also letting you know that you're not present in the moment to what is actually taking place. And the feedback of the horse is also letting you know that too if he's engaging in fear. Now, if you have a fear of cantering, then it's not actually probably the fear of cantering. I would look specifically, what is the fear of cantering? What do you specifically think is going to happen if you canter? Is it that you're going to fall off, or is it that your horse is going to pig root during a transition? What is the fear that you are specifically actually fearing? We're just saying as a fear of cantering, that's too nebulous. It's not specific enough. I would then get you to look, how specifically is that fear holding you back? And then I'd ask you a set of specific questions to be able to take you through to calm down your emotion of fear and bring you back into a balanced state of mind. So then you would be more objective in your reasoning to be able to respond instead of react. And then when you're in that response with objective reasoning mode, the horse will come from the other side and he will trust you, and you'll be able to have that dance and maybe perhaps canter together.
This is a question from Fiona Megan Phillip. She has two questions. Do we need to provide experiences for horses that triggers that deep fear instinct? Do we need to also allow them to become naturally lighter in condition during winter as they would naturally in the wild?
So, I think if we actually allowed the horses to be a horse and allowed him to engage in the self-preservation responses that are innate in him, then we would probably have a better relationship with them in the long run. Too often I get to see horses that are so dulled out that they don't have any fear or reaction responses, that they're almost like robots. And I just want you to ask yourself the question, if you were so dulled out to those experiences of life, would that be the life that you would want to live? I'll let you sit in that and answer that one yourself. Now, what was the second part of the question?
Do they also need to become
Sarah?
naturally lighter in condition during winter as they would naturally in the wild?
So for me, it's wiser to look for a balance of weight in terms of not too fat, not too light. So you want to look at how can we actually create a balance in terms of their weight. And you want to give them enough food to be able to sustain them and not let them get too light. Like here in Australia, our winter months are actually where they actually get fat. So it's during the summer months that we would actually have less food and we would allow them to lighten off. So I'm looking at how can I create an environment for my horses so that they actually don't fluctuate too much within their weight and lose too much or put too much on. It's about keeping that balance in moderation so that they can not gain too much weight if it was you in the summer and us in the winter, and then become too fat coming in, and then not to lose too much weight for us in the summer and you guys in the winter, so that they maintain a constant weight throughout the year. That's the wisest thing to do.
And Linda was just, commenting on the canned hunting and how, she wouldn't visit a place like that, which brings up a good point. What does Kevin talk about as things that we can do to help prevent that?
I guess it is about creating an awareness of to the greater community of what these actual lion cubbing or lion or cub petting farms or cub petting things are actually going on, and bringing that to the world and letting them understand that it's probably not ideal to go in and pat a lion cub because this is potentially what is going to happen to its future. So we all like to see things that are cute. We all get drawn into cute pictures of cats or dogs or even foals, but it's wise just to allow those animals just to be the baby animals that they are meant to be. And so if you can just bring that awareness to the rest of the greater community. And I'm just going to link it back to foals as well too, because this is something that I see quite often, which is imprinting. And effectively what is taking place with the lion cubs is that you're imprinting them to actually become desensitized to humans so that they can go on and ultimately be hunted. Now the horses, ultimately with imprinting, you're desensitizing them to humans so that they can go and live their lives with humans, and ultimately taking away that self-preservation away from them as well, which causes a lot of the effects that we see in terms of wellness and horse behaviours these days. So I just want you to think about that.
Great. We have another question here.
How do you work through behaviors in a newly started horse, such as balking or pushing through your leg in a turn?
Okay, so the first thing is that you've already labelled it as a bad behaviour. And balking and pushing through your leg, I'd ask the question, how is this a benefit to me and how is this a benefit to the horse? I neutralise my emotion that is actually taking place within that and the need from the human being to actually correct that or fix that, and then watch what happens. Now, it sounds counterintuitive. It sounds completely against the grain of what we've been trained as horse people. But ultimately, the horse is just letting you know that you're not present in the moment to actually listening to what he's actually looking for. And look at what it is that he's trying to avoid in you.
So just a couple more questions here. We're going to kind of wrap this up. The hour's just flying by here. So what are some things you see we as humans are doing that kind of get in the way of progressing with horses?
Probably, again, the biggest thing that is hindering our progression with the relationship that we truly want to share with horses is our projection of our value systems and expecting the horses to live inside our values. When we can truly understand and honor the horse for its value system and its wants and needs, then the horse will come from the other side and really give you or us as human beings what we are truly actually seeking and searching for. So that would be the number one thing that I would actually say hinders the relationship between the human and the horses.
So how can we do that? Just give us some real practical. I want some people to leave with some practical things that they could go out and implement tomorrow with their horse.
Okay. So the first thing that I would do is I would figure out, if you didn't already know what your highest values were, I would determine what is most important to you as an individual and what it is that your identity revolves around. What is the expression of your identity as a human being? What is that? And then look at the horse that you actually share your life with and determine what their value system is, and then link your highest values to the horse's highest values and see how the horse's highest values will actually serve you. Now, what I can do for you, Jack, is I can send you a list of 7 questions that I have that your listeners can actually do, is to determine their horse's highest values and actually do that, and then link them back to their highest values. Now, if you don't understand what your highest values are as a human being, Dr. John Demartini actually has a free value determination check on his website that you can go and download and answer the 13 questions, and perhaps you might want to share that link with them, Jack, if you have it available, where you can then determine your values, and then you know what your horse's values are, then to be able to link the two together. And perhaps that would be the easiest place to actually start to be able to get this relationship that you're truly actually looking for with your horse to move forward.
Awesome. So what are some things that are coming up for you? Tell us about what's your next exciting thing or next clinic or event that you're doing.
Okay, so I guess the next thing for me is, as you know, I like to travel the world and teach and research anything to do with horse and human behaviour. So the next thing, I'm actually going back to South Africa in November, and there I am doing an intensive course again with Dr. John Demartini on more about the abstract of the human mind and the infinity of how our mind actually does work. So that's the next thing for me, is taking human behaviour to the next level. So in terms of the horsemanship side of things, the next thing for me is I'm consistently building out my Horsemanship Institute globally, where we are taking in students to actually learn the intricacies of human behaviour and horse behaviour to be able to bring this message to the world. And ultimately the mission and vision of my institute is to actually see how we can create a relationship between the horse and the human that actually it can be symbiotic, and it can fulfill both the horse's needs and wants and also the human needs and wants, so that we get that dance that we're truly actually seeking and searching for with our relationship that we actually share with our horses. So I'm excited to actually travel the world and research and to learn these new things, or to be able to see these specific components that I can bring back and actually share when I'm teaching a workshop or doing a webinar like with you guys, or teaching the students that are in the institute down here in Australia, or just traveling the world doing my workshops anywhere, to be able to connect with people and to connect with horses. So I'm excited and inspired to actually bring this to the world.
Yeah, that is really awesome. So hopefully, I guess you come to the U.S. now and then, and hopefully we get to meet up at some point.
Yes, definitely. We'll be in the US next year in May, June, and July. So we're looking at Mexico, Texas, and Montana, Wyoming, and Colorado at this stage.
Awesome.
Cool.
Give us your website and where people can get to learn more about you, and if they want to get a hold of you, and how they can do that.
Okay, cool. So you can go to www.saltriverhorsemanship.com, and that's the horsemanship website, or you can find me on social media at Kellie Stewart, and we also have a Facebook page which is quite interactive, which is Salt River Horsemanship. So you can just look up any of those things and there'll be any information there, or you can contact me through the website if you want to ask any further questions. Or check us out when we're actually in the States or some part of the world, wherever you may be. Hopefully we get to meet sometime.
Yes, awesome. Well, sure appreciate all of this, and fascinating. It's kind of like feels like just scratching the surface on the depth of where we can go with it all.
Yeah.
So maybe we can get you to come back in the future and do this again.
Sounds great. I would absolutely love to. Well, thank you for the opportunity to be able to share this and to have this wonderful webinar with you and Sarah. I really appreciate it, and look forward to connecting with you guys in the future.
Yes, and so thank you all for joining us, and stay tuned. I'll be sending out an email to everybody. We'll put all those links in there, and also I'm going to give you, anybody who's interested in signing up for the Learning Circle, we'll have a month free. Going to give you a code to that just for joining us here this evening. So again, we thank you all for showing up, and thank you, Kellie, and look forward to chatting again.
Thank you.